Yeah, so just think about this. 504, which you'll hear about in schools, sometimes is used as a pre-referral process. So they also have to have an evaluation, and if they don't qualify for special ed services, they might get 504, but there's no funding for that, and the classroom teacher basically just has to have the plan there and be aware of these situations. But you're not going to get any special ed support for that particular student, okay? But what happens is that any institution that receives federal funding, if they don't provide 504 supports, they could get that funding pulled away. So like a university like UTEP that provides, that gets so many federal grants, if they don't provide the 504 services, they could get those grants taken away from them. And so that's why you have a Students with Disabilities office here on campus, and any school that receives federal funding gets that. What happens with private schools? Do private schools have to provide special ed services to students?
I think so.
No. And private schools, for example, won't even participate like in the free meals or free milk programs or anything like that, because that's how, the minute you get federal funding for anything, then they have to adhere to the federal laws, and they have to adhere to 50,
So
you know.
charter schools do.
But charter schools do, because charter schools do get funding from the state for the schools. Okay. So that's, I mean, that gets very messy as far as who it is. But just know that these are laws that are out there that protect the rights of kids with disabilities. So I think I've gone around in circles, and I didn't give you provided any specific guidelines, but I mean, I didn't know where you all were at that you would be coming here. And I know it's my responsibility to work with the students with special needs, and I am here for them and everything, but how are you going to help me out with it? And you can say, I can differentiate my curriculum as much as you want, but I still need support, because there's 2 or 3 of these kids that need a lot of attention, and they need some behavioral interventions and things like that. So I think that you have the right to ask for that. Okay? You need to keep asking, and you need to say, okay, I am more than willing to help the student, but are you going to give me an extra iPad so that he can practice his multiplications in the back? Do I have access to a computer where assistive technology could come in and maybe help with some of those skills that they need to build on? I mean, you still have to provide them the instruction, but then you need to find out how you can get that support for them.
Develop a program of multiplication table.
Right. Right. I mean, and we've gotten so, I mean, I keep seeing this, you know, it's like, oh, well, let's give them the chart. Let's give them, well, some of it is just repetition. And we know some kids are just not going to learn their multiplication facts. Some kids are just not. So let's give them some tools so that they learn how to do the process at least. Okay. And so those are things that, you know, even maybe on the side you could say, okay, here's a pack of flashcards. Let's do it, and you do this on the side, and let's, you know, find some way of rewarding them for that. And there's just going to be some children that need that extra help. And we'll see that there's some kids that have a math disability. I mean, there's a name for that. It's called dyscalculia. So there's actually research in the area of math disabilities, that there are some kids that just don't have those they can't conceptualize the numbers and how they put them together. Or every time they put them down, they put the numbers down backwards. So then it's a writing disability, you know. It doesn't mean that they can't learn, but it does impact you, especially when they have to take the test, and so that's when the label is helpful, because then you can get the accommodations that they need. This is from Anna's presentation last time. When a teacher tries to teach something to the entire class at the same time, chances are 1/3 of the kids already know it, 1/3 will get it, and the remaining third won't. So it says 2/3 of the children are wasting their time. We've talked a little bit about the demographics and, you know, just how things are changing. You've talked about, I mean, you're bringing to light some of the issues of, you have children who may be homeless right now. El Paso is seeing a large increase of homeless children coming to school. You've talked about children who, you know, just the population of El Paso, most of our kids are English language learners, whether they're identified as such or not. You've talked about kids maybe who don't want to really say where they live. We cannot ignore the issues that have happened across the border and the realities that our kids have lived with the drug war in Juarez. And I think we're receiving many more of those students in our schools here. We have family members who have experienced horrific, acts of violence. There's violence going on in the communities that we live in. So, I mean, the realities that our kids are living are very diverse. We've experienced some of that somehow. And we also have a large population of military kids who are experiencing the realities of a military life, and that, their parents might have been deployed and have experienced a war from a distance, but those are all factors that come in to deal with the kids that we're working with. So we cannot just assume that a child is ready to come to school to learn, as much as we would like that to happen. And yet school becomes the one place that should be the safe place for kids. And that we understand their reality, but we also understand the fact that this is the one place where we might provide them the opportunity to take off. And Angela, you were sharing that experience with the one kid, that once he learned his multiplication tables, the next year it wasn't just the multiplication tables, but maybe just that you took that effort of getting to know him and gave him something that he could take off on. All of a sudden, the next year he was in a gifted program, right? And we have to understand that kids are continuously developing too, so understanding the developmental stages where children are is really important. We cannot forget that all that research that Piaget did, whether we question it or accept it or not, but childhood development, the research in childhood development is very important. And we're also learning much more about how kids learn, how we learn, the whole medical side to learning, and which is becoming more, it's impacting us more and more as educators. We know what doesn't work, right? And so we need to take that into consideration. Another concept that I want you all to think about is one thing that I think is really important, is that we become culturally responsive educators, okay? And it doesn't mean that we speak the language of the child, because I might speak Spanish very well, but it doesn't mean I know how to teach either, right? So just assuming that because we speak the language does not mean that we're also in tune with what the kids need. But the changing demographics in our country, the realities of what we're facing in schools and in our schools, I think leads us to become more of a culturally responsive educator. And there's 5 principles, and basically if we start with the shape and respond to a variety of social and cultural contexts, you don't know where you're going to end up teaching. And every school has its own culture. Every community has their own culture. Every parent brings their culture with them. And so understanding where our kids come from, learning from that, it doesn't mean we feel sorry for the kids, because that was the one thing I think, Liz, you mentioned something about, feeling that you feel bad for the kids, or, we end up the pobrecito syndrome that we have a lot here. It's like, oh, those poor kids that live in poverty, and it's not so much about feeling sorry for them. It's not also giving them a false sense of hope that education is the one thing that's going to get them out there, but it's really going to help them. The more educated they are, the more formally educated they are, it's going to help them in their lives later on. So understanding that and understanding how to deal with that, because as educators, we also have to know where to draw the line, because we do have kids that come to school with tremendous issues, and we cannot take that on our shoulders, because then you'll drown yourself in there. But knowing where to find the resources around you to help you support that child are important. Enhancing learning partnerships. Special education, general education, working together. finding who else is out there. If you have volunteers, look at how many of you are already saying that you're volunteering. I mean, what a valuable resource that is to a teacher. Finding what parents are out there that can actually help you. We assume parents don't want to come in. Many of them are working and they can't come to school, but maybe there's other ways that they can help. They can help by reading books. Now with all the digital technology, they can tape that on, record a reading of a book on the cell phone and sending you that recording, and you'd have a book that's recorded for kids. You can bring the parents' voices to the classroom without having them to physically be there. Providing a challenging and learning environment. If we always just focus on the skills they don't have, they're never going to learn what else is out there. So I think, that's where we have to manage that thing. It's like, well, even though they don't know their addition and subtraction tables, it doesn't mean that they don't get access to other content. Understanding the learning process. How do kids learn? We need to understand, that goes back to learning about development and learning about how kids process information. And just understanding the child, knowing what clicks. We have a lot of gifted kids that are underachievers. Why is it that they don't want to, why is it that they're holding back? What is it that's holding them? And some kids have just become totally disillusioned with school. And I use, you see kids going to school when they're little, and you see them walking to school, and they have their backpacks, and they're all excited, and they can't wait to get there, and you see that excitement in the air, and by the time they get to middle school, they're like, oh, do I have to be there? So what have we done to our kids? In spite of everything that, the accountability for passing the state test, if we do good things in the classroom, the kids are going to pass those tests. If we just focus on the test itself, we're never going to get any further. The tests are minimum requirements. And that's, I think, one of the things that as teachers, you can get sucked up into the system and think that just because the principal says that, I would vouch to say, well, if you could come in and do what I have to do on a daily basis, be my guest, right? If you can do it better than I am, then I will do whatever you want me to do, right?